Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So this session is titled Mobilize, Inspire, and Embed the Transformation. I'm going to talk through a couple of kind of reflections that I've had in my journey in the different transformations that I've been leading or a part of. So first, I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. For those of you guys who are just joining, my name is Smallwood. I've been with Optus until a couple of weeks ago for 14 years, and I held a wide variety of roles, with the last 10 years being probably the most disruptive within Optus. There have been 4 CEOs that I've worked with in Optus over the last 10 years, and there has been a myriad change of the industry and the organization in its priorities and in its approach to market. And so the roles that I've held in the last 10 years have been around either changing the way that we prepare to go to market. So in the joint venture, we decided that we were never going to be able to break the back of the competitive advantage in network that Telstra had unless we could accelerate rollout. Of course, network rollout is highly capital intensive. And so what we did was approached Vodafone to actually go into a joint venture to roll out our 4G networks together. And that seems like a very counterintuitive thing to do because prima facie, we're giving each other a leg up in an area that we're trying to gain primacy. And we took the approach that we actually were never going to win if we look at each other versus trying to close the gap to Telstra on our ability to actually service the Australian citizens, as Scott would say. And so I led the joint venture between the two organizations after we actually formed the strategy and negotiated how we were going to change the way we rolled out network. And from there, I led the negotiations of our HFC network. So that would be, for those of you who are not familiar with telco, the internet and fixed voice network that Optus had built. Telstra built a parallel network that was slightly larger, but we competed with carrier margins. With NBN coming in to the field, what that meant was both Telstra and Optus were to sell our fixed line networks to NBN as part of their multi-technology strategy that Malcolm Turnbull put in place as the communications minister at the time. So I led the negotiations of that transaction, which led to us then rethinking our business model for internet and fixed line voice. I led that transformation, and that was really a distressed business type of transformation, which was quite interesting. And then from there, we had a bit of a foundation within Optus so that we had built over the 2 or 3 years prior, that we're now looking at how we would go from good to great. And we had a new CEO coming in from the Singtel group that was really looking to disrupt ourselves and change the way that we went to market and the way that we attacked our market share growth aspirations. And so a couple of roles that I did in that. One was around how could we actually improve our digital capability and accelerate our digital transformation, which then led to how we could build digital capability through Agile. And we then took it broader from not just digital, but how we could build out enterprise agility through organizing ourselves in a different manner throughout the organization, not just in the digital tribes, to try to increase our productivity and improve our customer experience. And then finally, in the last 18 months, I've been leading the couple parts of the SMB business. One, the Soho Micro business, which was a business unit looking at the very small businesses in Australia, because the organization saw a real opportunity for us to grab our unfair share of that market. And then over the last year, redesigning and revisiting the strategy for the organization of the SMB business unit and the marketing product strategy and the way that we develop products and go to market. So in that time, I've enjoyed and had the privilege of working with a lot of brilliant minds around how to create a step change within the Optus context. And today, what I'd like to talk through are a couple of topics. One is specifically around culture transformation. So in several of the transformations I've been involved in, they've included culture and as a part of a transformation. And mid last year, I had a conversation with the new CEO that came in last year, where she approached me about leading the culture transformation for Optus. And so I wanted to talk briefly about what is it and why would an organization do it. Then I'll talk a little bit around my views about how you would mobilize, energize, and embed it. And we've heard a lot about that already today. And then finally, something that I'm calling my culture transformation hacks. So actually, what were my failures and learnings from that? And then what would I say would be a way that you could reorient or reframe that problem to try to overcome it or prevent it? So this that you're looking at, this image that you're looking at, is actually in Colorado. And this grove of trees, which is huge, it's 47,000 trees, is called Pando. It's a colony of aspen trees. And I don't know how many of you know this, but the aspen trees actually grow from a single root system. And so this tree colony, to me, is analogous with organizational culture. This colony is made up of single male quaking aspen, each one of them individual, but it is the largest single organism on Earth. The colony of genetically identical trees share, as I said, one root system, and every tree, 47,000 of them, share the same roots. It's estimated to be about 6 million kilograms in mass, and it spans over 100 acres. But unlike other forests, Pando cannot be replanted. It must be regenerated. So Pando, as the word, means to extend or spread, and it reminds me of how culture is formed and changes. So culture, to me, is also an organism. It extends and adds constantly. It's constantly growing and nourished from the same value sets and belief system and behaviors. And it cannot be replanted. It must be regenerated. So I talked about how we had 4 CEOs at Optus over the last 10 years. And just like Pando, the incoming CEOs couldn't just lift and shift a culture that they wanted to embed. They had to actually work from within and spread and extend the new culture that they're hoping to create. So all of us know what transformation is. That's quite intuitive. And what culture transformation is and what culture is. But I thought that it would be more interesting to actually talk about this in reverse. So what is it? And what I'd like to talk about are these 3 common misconceptions about culture and indeed any business transformation. So culture, the lifeblood of the organization. Its values and behaviors are exhibited through social norms, but also through its policies and procedures. In my mind, the obvious metrics are the HR ones, like engagement scores, attrition rates. But what's more meaningful to me are the ones that show the measure of the organization, like how many ombudsman complaints they get and resolve, how quickly they resolve them, how well they pay their suppliers, and how timely they do that. And so what transformation and culture transformation to me is it's not a project and it's not an initiative. Now, those are 2 distinct concepts to me. A project is defined as a piece of planned work or an activity which is done over a period of time and intended to achieve a particular purpose. And a lot of times, people talk to culture transformation as exactly that, or they talk to it as an initiative, which is defined as a new plan or action to improve something or to solve a problem. Neither of those definitions are wrong, but to my point around Pando, culture is something that is existential. It doesn't just end. You don't just decide that you're done with culture and you set and forget, because it's constantly extending and spreading. And so to me, you can't call a transformation or a culture transformation a project or an initiative. And the third one, on culture transformation specifically, I have seen this done really poorly within Optus and in other organizations, where the culture transformation becomes HR's accountability. And why I disagree with that is because in a couple of our own transformations, the cultural element has been left to HR to own or lead. And what I've seen occur is that it leads to this passiveness by the leaders and the organization. They're waiting to watch things happen and watching for it to be rolled out. And inherently, that's flawed, because the HR business manager isn't actually part of the business. And so they may understand from an outside in perspective some of the things that need to be done, but they're not the people that our people are looking to be role modeling the change and be inspired. And so this needs to be owned by the business leaders and partially enabled by HR through its processes, its people, and its tools. And please don't get me wrong. I believe that effective partnerships between the HR partner and the business is key, but I really believe that the ownership has to be with the business leader. So why do people actually go into a cultural transformation? There are three reasons that I've seen. The first one is the incoming CEO. As in the case of Optus, the new CEOs that have come in have often wanted to reshape the culture of the organization as part of his or her legacy. And this may be because they want to introduce some productive cultural elements from their past, or that they think that there's something that's in the culture of the organization that's actually inhibiting what they want to achieve for the business. The second one is around market or industry shifts. So this may be in the form of new market entrants. And one of the sayings that I really like, and I find a truism, is technology is not the impetus for transformation. It's really the new startups and new entrants that are impetus for transformation. It's those people that take a piece of the value chain, the customer value chain, and they innovate on it, and they shift that paradigm and the expectation of a customer, like an Uber, like an Airbnb. And all of a sudden, the legacy organizations, of which I'd call Optus, are seen to be a bit dinosaur. And so you need to start to think about actually how you're going to adapt and pivot to try to stay relevant in that case. And usually that's seen as a dramatic change, especially what I've experienced in Optus. It's not something that's evolutionary. It's something that's the revolution that has started. And finally, there are organizations, as I said, when Alan, our CEO, came in, that see that actually we've got some foundational aspects of the business that are running quite well. And as Isaac in our last panel talked about some of those policies and processes and organizational structures that need to be in place and robust, in which case you can actually think about disrupting yourselves and go from good to great. And we had an aspirational leader in Alan as our incoming CEO that really wanted to take the organization from good to great. All three are driven by a belief that there's a significant shift in customer experience that's either needed or that will be an opportunity for grabbing market growth. So this is to me a little bit of a sucking eggs slide, but I wanted to talk about, and this theme is going to start to come out over the subsequent slides. We talked about the transformations, and in the conversations through the morning, we've seen that there are really some common principles. And it was funny because I had a quick peek at the Changing the Game book, and I really suggest that you have a look at it. I think that Graham and Mike have done a really great job of synthesizing transformation, and they have 5 steps to transformation. And the 5 steps, they've said it much more eloquently than what I've put on this page, but they're really kind of the same steps. You need to take an outside-in perspective and look at setting the destination. What's the potential for the organization that you want to take it to, especially as an executive or the senior team? Then you need to actually bring in the senior leaders to develop the plan on how to achieve that. And that ownership has to be held by them. I think that the change management aspect of a transformation is so critical that I actually pulled it out as a 3rd pillar. In my experience, I would recommend you bring in external help, because where I've had internal change management expertise come and help, what I found is that they're partially institutionalized in the organization. So their ability to influence and challenge the status quo isn't as strong as some external perspectives that you bring in just to quickly shift the perspective of the organization. The 4th in my mind is actually launching the transformation with the organization. So, sharing that compelling story of why, outlining specifically and with some specificity on how we're going to transform and how we're going to get to that destination. And then ultimately, in helping the people understand how we will all win through this transformation. And then finally, implementation. So clear, measurable performance infrastructure. That includes resources, tools, processes, the objectives being really clearly articulated and measured. And so over on the right-hand side, I loved this image because it's really around how we're the same but different. That looks like to me potato mash, but it's actually cauliflower. It's that one ingredient that actually changes it on a molecular level. Just like every transformation, it looks the same on that side, but it's inherently different through the people and the way that the transformation is actually carried out. So, on to culture transformation hacks. I'm calling these hacks because I see them as tips on what to avoid from my own failures. And these are not born from a lack of understanding of what needs to be done, or even in enacting what needs to be done. But usually where we've failed in the transformations I've been involved in, it's been from what doesn't get done that leads to the shortcomings in the transformation. So I'm going to talk through the 5 that I see as CT hacks, and I hope that they resonate with you. I hope that as we are going through this, that you start to think about some systemic failings in transformations that we can call out and learn from each other. So the fun fact about this apple: how many people have you seen, and indeed I have always done this way, cut an apple like I showed in the agenda page? You have that apple, and then you cut it into slices and you get rid of the core. Or you have one of those core little tools and you stick it in and then you cut the apple. Now, I've been doing that my whole life, and I do it all the time now because I'm a mother of 2 young children. And then I came across this hack. This man put together the apple, put a rubber band around it, and cut four lines. And you instantly have both the core removed and the apple slices. I thought, genius. That's just saved me some time, and it looks really cool. And so I loved this simple trick. So I hope that you find these hacks in some way, like this apple hack, useful, and a useful tip that you can quickly or easily enact. So the first one, time up front. It's more than we think. And what I mean by that is, we talked just at the last panel around how in the setup, and the planning that is so critical to make sure that you're set up for success. In the first panel, we had a question around what are the elements of success and how do you make sure that you're set up? What are the non-negotiables? In my experience, what I've found is that this time is more than we think in two aspects. One, it's more than the organization generally gives itself, and that's usually from an impatient CEO. So they've defined the vision. They've had some consultants come in, and they have a view of what they want done. Then they get impatient. Why aren't people on board? Why do you have to have this conversation? Why aren't we just cracking on? And so a lot of times you feel yourself time crunched and you don't actually have the conversations that you need to set yourself up for success. The second one is it's more than we think. It's more important than we credit. Back to those non-negotiables, what I've found is that if we don't hold firm in our role to make sure that we have set up the transformation for success through the right conversations and the right debates and the right planning, then we're kind of running behind ourselves and chasing our tails for the whole time. And it will take a reset to actually get it back on track. So to combat this, what I've done is actually led multiple iterative workshops. And I try to get pre-alignment with the CEO and hopefully with some strong external support to agree on go, no go criteria and timelines with the senior leaders. So that's not even iterative workshops about the initiatives. It's about actually what do we say is ready? When can we hit go? And that has helped a lot when we've gotten that right to actually successfully mobilize the transformation. My second hack is around the launch. Someone spoke earlier about how there was a full day dedicated to the launch. I think that may have been Mike, and that was a really great activity, and I totally agree. But I also think it's not just an event, and not but and where I was naive when I first ran the transformation was I thought that this U-Butte bells and whistles launch event was really going to set us up for success. And why I realized that was naive, and you guys are going to probably all go, of course, duh, is because of the human element. What I found much more effective is actually having each of the senior leaders hold that little tiny plant and actually start to have the conversations where we actually get aligned about what it is we're launching, for what purpose, what the vision is, and what the why is. And once you start having those conversations and have them have the conversations, I found that it's been a much more productive launch when you actually go to the event, because it becomes something that has been communicated, has been spoken about, has been, questioned. People have actually had time to kind of soak it in and start to state their objections before you go into the launch event. And sometimes they'll actually voice it in the launch event. And that has been super useful in the times where I felt as if we've actually mobilized the organization really well. The third hack that I have is one that also from my failings and my failures in the past, I didn't do, which is explicitly agree the trade-offs together. And this isn't just a once-off, but it's something that I think in that planning, you need to get a baseline of and actually then set some space in the governance model to actually revisit regularly. I think that if you're on track to achieve everything in the transformation on time and to budget, then I believe that there is actually more potential in an organization. I also think that sometimes, on the other side, focusing on hitting big, hairy targets will have unintended consequences if they're not considered. So for us, I talked a little bit earlier today about a couple of examples. One was around the digital transformation and how we embarked on that with very ambitious digitalization goals. And what we did was we actually impacted the customer experience because we didn't design the initiatives from the customer back. We just looked at the OpEx outcome. And that meant that we actually had to have one of those intervention conversations with the CEO when we're asking for millions of dollars to be re-injected in the business. Now, that was a conversation that was not pleasant, but we're lucky enough that actually we had the courage to have it, and the CEO actually had the wherewithal to listen and make the decision to stop, reinvest, and then reform a strategy. So to prevent this, it's really useful to take time to calibrate the targets against cross-functional trade-offs. Just like this meal, you only have a finite amount of food, so it's not everyone for themselves trying to create their own end dish. It's around creating a meal together. And that time in healthy debate, and sometimes it'll be relatively heated because, if you're a business unit owner, you may not want to make that trade-off. So you may have to go away and look at it from another approach or another angle until you actually get to consensus. And you need to make sure that you've got a diverse group of senior leaders in the room. I found that like-minded approach isn't so useful in these types of conversations. And when we agree the moments of truth, so we know that we're going to do this, but we're going to lose why, I felt this energy in the room where people felt as if they were heard and they're coming out aligned in their purpose. This has helped accelerate the mobilization and the energy of the culture transformation that I've been a part of, because you're not in this constant cycle of trying to remediate unintended consequences. The other added benefit is that it builds the trust between the senior leaders as well as the people in the organization, because they start to believe in the potential of the transformation in being sustainable and the trust in their ability to make decisions on how to succeed. So the fourth of 5 culture transformation hacks that I wanted to talk to briefly was around change management. I talked about how my third pillar of the recipe for transformation was around change management. It has been so critical in getting right for the transformations I've been a part of that I wanted to call it out, because the expertise that you get and the conversations you get when you have someone or a group of people who can actually shepherd the organization through the people element of the change has been so profoundly impactful that it has led, and a lot of times, to where you have areas actually really blossom and they really adopt the transformation and they start to take it as their own. And there's this moment of inflection in a transformation that I just love, when you can start to feel, and Sam talked about this in the last panel, that moment of crisis is kind of command and control. You're trying to mobilize it. It's not a time to take questions. You just need to hold the course and show them the way. There's this period where then you get into operating in this transformation that I've found just beautiful, where it starts to become the line leaders and the people within the business that start to take control, and they start to actually own that transformation as the new norm in their organization. And I've had people who have started to actually look at how they can go to the next stage of transformation, and they start feeding the well rather than us going and trying to seek opportunities or pivots. And that has been such a beautiful time, because that's when you start to feel like, this little seedling's actually starting to grow and become sustainable. Why do I say external help? I think that the external help, to my point earlier, really gives experience and expertise and a perspective from other experiences outside the organization. And the change management practice within Optus, I found, were really good at understanding the human element and supporting business leaders in what they're trying to drive within their teams. But in something really disruptive, be able to come in and be a bit of an independent source is really useful. So that's why I recommend credible external change support to support sustainable change. And finally, this is something that Daniel touched on in our panel around, making sure that you have a view and a lens on all the little micro changes that are happening within the organization so that you make sure that you're joining the dots and not creating unintended consequences. This is akin to that, but there are sometimes conversations around organizational climate versus organizational culture, and they're very different. Culture is really around the Pando root system. It's the basis of which the organization behaves. Microclimates are actually, or the climate of an organization is really, what's happening to it, what external forces are on it. And there are microclimates that are happening within the organization all the time. So this tree is an example of a microclimate. It's probably about a sunny 32 degrees outside, but that couple sitting underneath the tree are enjoying potentially a nice cooler environment, an environment of 24, 25 degrees. That's a microclimate. This is one that I haven't seen incorporated into culture transformations or regular transformations in planning or execution, really in an industrialized, productionized way. And it's one element that I think goes to the heart of building a sustainable change over longer periods of time. And this goes to the conversation we had earlier a few times today around adapting your transformation through disruption. So the microclimates of an organization can be from within, it can be external. So for example, with that NBN example at Optus. Optus has many services that it provides to the public and to our citizens. Scott, I hope you're still listening because I'm adopting that. And the fixed line business and internet business is just a little microcosm of a large organization, but it had a microclimate of its own. It had this external factor that was making it unsustainable. Now, through your transformation, I bet you can think of lots of areas that have little microclimates happening, and some are in kind of stable run state. Actually having the space within your transformation to talk to and address microclimates on a sustainable basis, I think is really one of the secret sauces of having the transformation be successful and really embedding it, because people start to see how transformation interplays with BAU. And so this is one that I have found a profound change in my thinking about how to lead transformations. So those are my 5 cultural transformation hacks. I hope you found them interesting, or at least the images interesting. But one final note, I just wanted to conclude with one last thought, which is around our role. I believe that a lot of times the transformation office is seen as synonymous with program office, and that our roles are seen as a program director role or project lead or program lead. And I believe we need to move away from being identified this way into becoming a business executive that sits at the table as an equal to the other executives, that's driving and influencing outcomes for the organization with clear KPIs and objectives. And I think that the accountability needs to be joint between your business partner as well as yourself. So you're kind of working in partnership. And this shared accountability with the business leaders and yourself actually drives a better outcome for the organization. The reason why I have an allergic reaction to this, and I'm not, and there's a view that you can take, which is some people will say that, but that's okay because it is a program, but it isn't a program. It actually marginalizes our ability to drive sustainable change. Because I think that we've kind of talked through this morning about what our role is. It's chief role model, chief influencer, chief advocate, chief mobilizer, re-energizer, reassurer, chief cheerleader, chief holder of the mirror. And in my experience, every transformation is unique. So a word of hope. I think that a big part of what makes transformation succeed and its uniqueness in the how of the execution of the transformation is in the CTO. someone asked earlier about the key traits of a CTO. I'm still learning, but there are a couple that came to mind other than the ones that you would normally think about. And where I've seen it proliferate today is in the mindset of everyone who's been a part of this day so far. It's in this optimism bias. There's this real optimism about and hope for the future and the destination. And the second one is a belief in the human spirit. So all these transformations are actually done through people. And there's this belief that people can change and that people will want to work towards that purpose. And we bring something that no other executive will provide around the table, an outside in perspective from within. I find that incredibly powerful. So I think that if we can define our individual purpose, our personal purpose for taking on the role, identified our approach and style and our non-negotiables and agreed them with the exec, then we will naturally and uniquely mobilize, inspire, reassure, and support the organization through its transformation. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Wen. So I will take the role of question facilitator for this part because you presented. So we'll give you the opportunity to now sit back. So a few things have come through for you here. So one question is, how would you suggest an organisation in an operational environment in a state of hyper change? So particularly drawing on that cultural transformation, sentiment, and how would you suggest an organisation finds their place in an environment that is always changing, particularly in the last 12 months?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's my connection, but let me just paraphrase what I think you said, and you tell me if I got it right. You're wondering how the transformation office supports through a time of crisis and when there's a lot of change on. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think that San actually answered that really well in the panel previously, and I think it is around when there's a lot of change happening externally. That's when I find that actually being really consistent in the communication and being that rudder of constancy and downplaying the amount of change that's happening in the transformation really helps. So it's almost as if you're counterbalancing that state of anxiety that the organization's feeling by showing people the North Star and staying true to that and staying really calm.
Fantastic, great. And some words of affirmation from some of our attendees who have said they've loved the photos and the passion around the topics and they've learned a lot. Then there's they love the tangible examples provided that illustrate the cultural change and transformation that occurs when tangible real-world actions occur consistently that are visible, aligned, and genuine. So really fantastic job, Wen. Thank you so much for sharing that with everyone.
No, thank you.